Hi, my name is Maureen Conway. I'm Executive Director of the Economic Opportunities Program at the Aspen Institute, and delighted to welcome you to this video discussing changes in the gig economy as part of our Working in America discussion series. The Economic Opportunities Program, we explore promising policies, strategies, and ideas to help low and moderate income Americans connect to and thrive in today's changing economy. In particular, we look at opportunities to connect people to work and to help them connect to better jobs and find better livelihoods in today's fast-changing world of work. In addition, we look at opportunities for people to explore entrepreneurship and ownership of business assets as an economic opportunity strategy. For over 5 years, we've been hosting the Working in America discussion series here in our offices and the Aspen Institute. And in the Working in America discussion series, we've been looking at a wide variety of issues that affect today's working people and how businesses, policymakers, and others can find new ways to organize work in ways that work for business, work for workers, and help more people build successful, sustainable livelihoods in today's economy. I'm delighted to welcome you to this conversation on the gig economy, which really looks at a number of ways that today's world of work has become a little bit less secure, a little bit more uncertain for many working people, but also offers some new opportunities. And we brought together an interesting set of experts from business, from policy, from academia that are really looking at it from all the perspectives, from the worker perspective, from the business perspective, from the public policy perspective, to really think about how independent work can be organized to be good work and also to be part of a really thriving and growing economy. So we're really delighted to bring this conversation to you to look at these issues and think about opportunities for creating better work. We're very grateful to our supporters in this series and very much thank the Ford Foundation, Prudential Financial, and the Walmart Foundation for their support of the Working in America series. We encourage active social media participation in all of our Working in America dialogues, and we encourage you to comment on the conversation that you see today using our hashtag #TalkGoodJobs.
I want to start by asking our panelists, who are we talking about when we say gig workers? Lindsay, you're in a unique position because you've been a gig worker. You've researched this area, so you really have the ground covered. So could you lay out some of the things that you've learned? Tell us about your experience and what it's like making a living in this type of work and what it's like to have an algorithm as a boss.
Yeah. So I've been driving for the ride-hailing companies on and off for the past 2.5, 3 years. And I've also interviewed about 100 drivers, and I've been following them for 3 years. So I want to say it's tough. I felt like it was definitely tough to earn my daily bread, but it also gave me a lot of flexibility, and you guys have probably heard that. I could schedule it around when I had papers to do or classes to teach or things like that. And some of my big findings, so one is this idea, like, what do you do when you have an algorithm that you report to as a boss and not a human? And I find that folks have these sort of tactics about how they work with the algorithm, but they don't even call the algorithm an algorithm. It's the Lyft made me do it, or I was just talking to my app. So there's like this anthropomorphizing of the work where you think of it as a person, even though it's actually a platform and actually a bot that is responding to you. And so the tactics people have with the algorithm is, they can sort of just follow it. So if there's a surge going on, they're going to drive to the surge. But then they can also deviate. So some folks think there's a surge going on. That means there's going to be too many cars there. So I'm going to go the other way than the surge is going to tell me. And then most cleverly, the last set of tactics I call sort of feigned acquiescence. It's where people are pretending to do what the algorithm is telling them to do, but they're actually not doing it. So it's imagine if your boss says, asks you what you're doing, and you say you're working on a report, but really you're on Facebook or you're about to go out and play some golf or some tennis. And the funniest example actually came up on the night that Trump was inaugurated. And it was a driver that I interviewed here in DC, and he was getting all these ride requests telling him to go down by the White House. And he's like, I don't want to go down there. There's hundreds of cars. It's going to take me forever to pick up somebody, and I'm not going to be able to take them to where they want to go. I'm going to be stuck in gridlock. And so he is driving up 16th Street to try to get away from the White House. But the app keeps on pinging him to go to where the inauguration is at, because this is where all the people want rides. and he doesn't want to hurt his 100% acceptance rating. Because high ratings not only keep you active on the platform, but it's like this sense of pride. And so he has these standoffs with customers, that'd be us in the room, where he keeps on accepting rides, but is going further north up 16th Street to Silver Spring, waiting for the customer to cancel the ride. That way his 100% acceptance rating is indeed. So that's a little bit about what happens when you have an algorithm as your boss. Sometimes you listen, sometimes you don't, sometimes you're kind of finding a way around it. And I'd say the other big finding around my work is, why do some people feel empowered and some feel exploited, even though they're doing the exact same type of work? And it's probably, if you've read some of the public press pieces, some folks demonize the gig economy, and some's like, oh, there's flexibility. Now you can work on the beach anytime you want. So both are true. And what I'm finding that's sort of driving how do people do this interpretation, empowered versus exploited, it depends, one, on your career biography, so what type of work you've had before. So if you're a first-generation immigrant to this country and you're sort of expecting to sort of start at the bottom of the ladder and work your way up, and maybe you also did lower skill, lesser paid work in your country of origin, you're more likely to feel empowered. So it's based on career biography and your expectations of the future. It would make you feel more empowered. Now, if you're sort of in the middle, you've maybe always been doing sort of low-skilled work at Walmart or McDonald's, and you're like, nah, this is better. But you're kind of like, all right, like neither empowered nor exploited, but you're kind of in the middle. But the folks who tend to feel the most exploited are folks, of course, who have been laid off from more higher-paying manufacturing jobs or from even sort of like pink-collar work, and they're trying to stop downward social mobility. And this is not the way they were expecting their life goals, their American dream to be planned out. And those are the folks who are usually feeling a bit more exploited.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Now I want to turn to Josh. You run a platform for hospitality workers to pick up shifts at restaurants, bars, and hotels. So I hope you can contrast a little bit here. How did you come up with that idea, and what drives your business and workers to use it?
Great question. Thank you. From our perspective, it was really driven by choice. The demographic that Hire caters to is one that wants the choice to work where and when they wish, based on the availability in their schedule and based on the skill and the time that they have, which are two assets that we're able to unlock. Assets, by the way, that don't require an expensive down payment. These are things that we own. And so, we really started it based on that idea of choice and focusing on a worker that loves aspiration. The idea of Hire is born out of wanting to earn extra money, but not so much for the cash, but more about what can that extra cash do for me? How can I aspire to move up a level or two in life by earning a little additional income this month in a hospitality business or a retail business that might need some extra staff because there's an event in town, or it's a big football weekend, or there's just a seasonal spike in retail. And the people gravitate from a worker perspective to our platform for that very reason. And from a business perspective, it's because there is a need. There's tens of thousands of businesses that are using platforms like ours because they need to access people in a way that they're unable to because there's such a ridiculously shallowing labor pool. And they need to access people that frankly want and choose to work in this type of environment. And so it's either adapt or fall behind. And that's why we're finding success in hospitality and retail.
Sure. I'm curious, have you ever done any type of gig work?
Yeah, absolutely. Gig work, it's interesting. You started by talking about how long gig work has been around. Gig work has been around for decades. We just now, in the last couple of years, actually refer to it as something called gig work. It was freelance or independent contractor work, whatever you might be. And it's been just shy of a decade now that really the rideshare type platforms have made it prominent. I've done gig work. I've worked as an independent contractor for many years in my professional life, pre-hire, and certainly see the benefits and the pitfalls that come with it, and that's helped support us as we've built out a sustainable platform today.
Jake, at Prudential, you work on the products for independent workers, and Prudential produces a lot of great research about this space. Can you tell us how this work intersects with Prudential's broader focus on financial wellness and what you've learned about the types of people that do gig work and why?
Yeah, absolutely. So as we think about financial wellness, just to level set on that, it's really about how we can make people's lives better by solving the financial challenges that exist in a changing world. And as we think about the gig economy or independent workers, a lot of labels for it, it's really through that lens of how can we help people with their financial wellness. And everyone's different in that regard. And as we've studied the rise of the gig workforce, one of the things that we've identified is that there's a lot of different ways to label it and call it, and people think very differently about it, but it's very personal to them in terms of what matters and why they do it, and what their objectives and goals are. And it's really about the type of work they do, as opposed to I'm a 1099 worker, I'm a freelance worker, what have you. So as we think about the financial wellness challenge and opportunity, it's really about how do we access the quote unquote gig workers and provide solutions that are relevant to them and what's most important for their needs.
Excellent. Have you ever done gig work?
I have.
Tell me about it.
Consulting.
Yeah.
So really getting out on my own and being my own boss and generating clients and trying to make it that way. Learn a lot. To Josh's point, it really helps as I'm doing this type of work now.
Excellent. And I want to bring in Libby. Your work at the Aspen Institute focuses on portable benefits for workers, and you think a lot about what businesses and policymakers in the field should be thinking about and working on. What do you see as the challenges between the current policy framework and the changing nature of work as we've been discussing here?
Yeah, I think our work in general focuses on addressing some of the challenges that workers and businesses face as the nature of work has been changing in the United States, and looking at creating economic stability for workers today and tomorrow. And when we take a look at some of the potential policy solutions in this area in particular, we do see independent work being a prevalent form of work in the United States today. And as we explore ways to address that, we're looking at the ways policymakers are responding. And we see that happening in kind of 5 key areas. We see some policymakers responding by trying to address wages and pay in the gig economy, with some important sort of steps taken recently at the city level in both Seattle and New York. Happy to talk a little more about those later. We do see benefits, as Maureen sort of framed in her opening, as an important economic stabilizer for families, and are looking increasingly at ways that we could extend portable, prorated, and universal benefits to workers in the gig economy, and see policymakers in a number of states advancing policy proposals along these lines. Protections, worker protections, including those currently available to W-2 or more traditional workers, like policies around safe workplaces and protection from harassment and discrimination is another area where policymakers are starting to sort of move things forward. As well as worker organizing is a place where policymakers have begun to explore ways to advance, whether it's new worker organizing models or extending traditional models to new types of workers. And I think that is especially important, as Lindsay was saying, in the context where in the gig economy, you do not necessarily have a human as your boss, where you're working for an algorithm. Organizing may be particularly compelling as a solution. And finally, there are policymakers coming from a variety of different perspectives who are looking at classification, worker classification, and will frequently sort of talk about quality as they look to shift the line in the sand between employees and independent contractors, with potentially a different definition of quality. So some may be thinking about increasing flexibility as being an attribute of quality, and others may be thinking about increasing stability as an attribute of quality. But we do see sort of policy responses in those few areas. And I would just say overarching, there are a couple broad challenges. One is just that the policy framework in which work exists today didn't necessarily contemplate the existence of the types of business models we see today. So I think that is just a basic challenge which policymakers are struggling with and looking to sort of address and close that gap. And the other piece is, I think this speaks to the nature of Hire's business model, but we do see a range of supplementary earning strategies in the workforce today. And we aren't necessarily doing a great job of capturing or counting supplementarity in earnings. And we may see policy frameworks sort of failing to address supplementarity, in part because we're just not counting or capturing it well enough.
I want to kind of stick with this idea of whether gig work is a potential source of stability by evening things out for workers, or if it's a destabilizing force, or it's probably both, right? So Josh, please tell us, what have you learned about the challenges workers face in the industry where you operate in terms of managing their financial lives, and what draws workers to the Hire platform?
Interestingly enough, the challenges that we see gig workers have are very similar to many of us in this room. It's about budgeting and savings and recognizing that you don't want to end up with too much month at the end of the money. And it's especially with the demographic we cater towards, which is that in the 19 to 27-year-old range, it's really a learning experience for them. And that's where it's exciting when you see the type of work that Prudential's doing, because it's about education and giving workers in the gig economy the supports and the tools they need to budget effectively and save appropriately for, yes, things like taxes, retirement, but also just what we've all experienced, rainy days, downtime in terms of business levels. We flew yesterday to Washington from Toronto, which was in the midst of a crazy snowstorm. And it was amazing how many businesses in the third largest city in North America just shut down yesterday, just shut down. And so you think of being a worker, be it a W-2 or a 1099 for that matter, and the earnings that you anticipated getting that day are now no longer there. And so rainy days happen. I mean, it was a snowy day, but I think, I touched on it briefly. The taxation piece is certainly important. Workers in the gig economy are responsible to declare their income and file their taxes. And many of them are used to the withholdings that come with a W-2 job, be it because they're working in that type of a space currently, and they just don't know what they don't know. And so part of our responsibility as a responsible platform is to educate them and give them the supports they need to hold back those funds.
In my reporting, I've talked to many workers who have said, I took this job not because I think it's going to pay me a lot better or that I like to work a lot better, but that, I wanted the benefits, right? I needed the stability of healthcare. I was worried about my retirement. So that kind of brings into the discussion about, well, should we be thinking about portable benefits? And so Libby, I know this is an area that you study closely, so tell us about that idea of portable benefits, and how do businesses and the government think of it the same or different?
So, excuse me, it's at the end of a sinus infection. I'll try not to spread it around. The idea of portable benefits is sort of captures a number of different ideas, but in general, portable benefits models share three core attributes. The first is that they're portable, which means that individuals can take them with them from job to job, and that they're connected to you as an individual and not connected to your employer as sort of a primary point of connection. The second attribute is that they are prorated, which means that contributions to benefits funds can be made on the basis of hours worked or other sort of productive unit, whether that's a trip in the case of rideshare or a task in the case of some other platforms, and that multiple employers could theoretically support these benefits either at the same time or over time. And then the third attribute is that they're universal, which means that they are available to workers regardless of the type of their work arrangement. So this is a concept that the term portable benefits is quite new, but there are programs and models that have existed for decades that share these three core attributes. I mean, Social Security is a program, shares these three core attributes, especially after some important reforms opened that program up to most workers. The Affordable Care Act is another example of a portable benefit, which has extended health benefits to people outside of the employment relationship. And then there are other models that are a little more specific to this type of universe. I think there I'd point to the Black Car Fund in New York, which is a program, it's a legislatively created program through which drivers, for hire drivers, can access workers' compensation coverage in the event that they become injured on the job. And that's a program that's been around since 1999, which to me feels like it should be recent, but that's actually, you know, a 20-year-old program. Those are a few examples of some portable benefits programs. And I think, you know, we have been engaging with people, stakeholders around the table on this issue, whether it's worker advocates or businesses, policymakers, and everybody sees their challenges a little bit differently. So, you know, I think worker advocates on behalf of workers experience, as part of gig work, a fair amount of income volatility. There may be schedule volatility, which may be self-imposed, but fuels that income volatility. And so people may be looking for stability. In the business category, I think in general, we hear people talk about churn in their workforce and a desire to have an opportunity to have a mechanism to help retain workers, which providing contributions to benefits might help answer. And then policymakers, in many cases, are thinking about sort of long-term economic stability, whether a lack of benefits might cause pressure on public support systems, and other issues. So there may be different sort of motivators that are bringing people to the table and causing them to sort of circle around this idea as an interesting one. But it does seem to be an idea where there is at least some consensus. But of course, the devil is in the details.
So when you're going to be talking to your students, you know, what do they need to know about this emerging area of the economy, and what are you going to be teaching them?
Yeah. How about I start really basic about how about their everyday behaviors now and how that affects drivers. Because I did focus groups with both students and sort of rank and file consumers in a few cities across the United States. And there are little things that we don't do that could have or little things we do or don't do that have a big effect for the drivers. You know, one obviously is saying hello and goodbye and not slamming the car door. You wouldn't imagine like how many times that does not happen. I mean, most people have their headphones on, like I'm guilty. So it's like people wouldn't even talk to me when I was a driver. So I'd encourage students to do that, to keep their music at a reasonable volume, to not flirt with the drivers because it puts them in an awkward situation, to not try to buy drugs from their drivers. That also creates very awkward situations. God, that happens a lot. Can you tell me where's the best place to get XYZ? I have no idea. And then lastly, students tend to ask their driver to do things that puts it. So I'll give you the examples of if you have 5 students that want to go to some party across town and they all want to get into the car, but they're not 5 seatbelts. And so they're really sort of pushing the driver to get in that 5th person because they don't want to get a second car. And that puts the driver in a difficult situation because so many of them some of them can say no to the groups of students, but then they'll get dinged on the ratings. Or the students will sort of make complaints that will get the driver in trouble, that the complaints aren't true, but they're upset that they're not getting what they want. But then the driver, you know, what if he acquiesces and puts all the people in the car and then they're in an accident? Like there's so many sort of like, you know, trickle-down effects or sort of snowstorms. So, you know, I would just ask students to be wise in sort of their everyday sort of consumption of these.
Sure.
Yeah.
And as these students, you know, aspire to become managers, how do you think, you know, they, you know, in 2019 will be thinking about how the gig work might relate to their maybe traditional business as opposed to, you know, someone maybe 10 years ago that wouldn't even have considered that? Well, do you think is the mainstream business now thinking about how they should be engaging in gig work or with gig workers differently than they may have in the past?
Maybe so. This definitely feels to be something that's on everybody's mind. Like so many times we talk about Uber and Lyft and Juno as if they are the gig economy, and sort of we were talking before how there's so many other companies that make up gig work. But it seems like ride sharing, maybe because it got there, or ride hailing got there first because for whatever reason it just sort of punches above its weight in how the size is. But I think some of the things I'd like us to be in conversation about is folks are sort of being good consumers of these, is that so much of this talks about this type of work as supplemental income. Like, oh, you've got a full-time job and now you've got this gig plus and you're earning extra money.
Right.
But in most of the drivers I talk to, that extra money is like not to go to Hawaii. Like it's to pay child support, it's to pay utilities, it's to buy medicines or their kids' summer camp. So this is actually money that they're dependent on. So I feel like by calling it supplemental so casually, we're diminishing this type of work and how important it is. And if you look at the folks, I'll stick with the ride-sharing industry because it's what I know the best. Most drivers, it looks like sort of consistent from all the surveys, are doing this for some sort of extra income. So they are multiple gigs or a full-time job. But if you look at the majority of work that's actually being done on the platform, it's by folks who are doing this for a full-time job. So it needs to be really careful as you're sort of balancing this conversation and not to have one voice outshine the other, because even though most of them are doing it for this additional income that they're dependent on, the majority of the work is by folks who are doing this, full-time or full-time hours plus.
Now, Jake, I want to ask you, about the products that Prudential is working on, and how do these products that you might market towards gig workers differ from your traditional work?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. Again, as we think about financial wellness, a main part of our business is in the workplace, so delivering traditional benefits like disability or life insurance or retirement solutions to employers who make those programs available to their employees. We need to think differently. It starts with really understanding the individuals that fall in the, again, gig work in quotes category, and what are the things that are most important to them. So I'll give you an example of something that we launched recently, which we call Covered. As we did in-depth interviews with this population, one of the things that, and Josh mentioned it, that we found was a main pain point was just saving for taxes. The awareness that it needs to be done, that someone isn't doing it for you, and the discipline to do it. Similarly with time off, time between gigs, smoothing the income. So we launched something called Covered that individuals can go, and it automates that process of, as I get income in, money moves into an account that's saved for taxes, pay time off, that type of thing, as well as the ability to make insurance and retirement product available as well to the individual. So at least there's an access, there's an awareness for that. Now that may not be for everyone in terms of buying life insurance, for example, through the platform, but our starting point is trying to replicate what would exist in an employer-employee relationship in a traditional sense by giving the awareness and then giving access. And that's one of the challenges, is access to some of these programs that people otherwise would get in that employer relationship.
I think there's a whole variety of behaviors and solutions that we see in the marketplace. Some policy approaches as well to broaden out the context for some of these solutions. So I think we, over the last few years, certainly have seen kind of an explosion, a proliferation at least, of different types of solutions that have emerged from the nonprofit sector. So for example, the National Domestic Workers Alliance, their labs division, which is their innovation unit, did a lot of deep work to understand some of the financial stability challenges faced by domestic workers, and have created a product called Aaliyah, whereby a household that employs a home cleaner can begin to pay into a benefits fund for that cleaner to be able to draw down paid time off and certain other coverage products. So that's an example of something coming from the nonprofit sector. I think we see a variety of solutions kind of coming out of the kind of startup innovation space, as well as established companies looking to serve a market segment that is relatively underserved when it comes to sort of benefits access. We are also looking at the fact that it's not just access to some of these these products. I mean, anyone could theoretically start to set aside money in a savings account to save for retirement. But part of what makes employer-based retirement savings compelling is that there's also an employer contribution. So there are some legislative proposals that we are tracking closely that engage the employer or employer, which I will put in quotes because that is a legal term. It's also a plain English term, which just means somebody who hires somebody to do something, but that engage employers in contribution to support benefits. And I think the couple examples that I would point to represent two different approaches to extending portable benefits to gig workers. So one idea is to build a whole new model of access to benefits for gig workers, for independent workers. And I think the idea that best exemplifies that is in Washington state. There's a piece of legislation that creates a mechanism by which platforms or labor intermediaries, or the language has changed over the last couple of years as the bill has evolved, but it allows a company like Uber, for example, to contribute to a benefits fund for individuals who are doing gig work, and provides a set of governance requirements for the type of entity to be an administrator of those benefits, which is all written in a way that is very pro-worker, and it sort of envisions as one type a worker representative organization as the administrator of benefits of that type. I think another approach is taking a look a little bit more incrementally, maybe benefit by benefit, or looking to open up benefits that exist to new types of workers. And there, I think a great example is the recently passed piece of legislation in Massachusetts regarding paid family and medical leave, which under that bill, if a company has a workforce that is more than 50% independent contractors, they are treated as an employer for the purpose of contribution to paid family and medical leave coverage. It's still an opt-in for the independent contractors themselves, whether they want to draw down on paid family and medical leave, but it recognizes the fact that if there are businesses that are relying heavily on independent contractors as part of their workforce, that they are going to sort of face employer-level obligations when it comes to funding this type of social insurance.
Everyone in the audience is a consumer and a voter. You can pick one. What policies should the audience members encourage their elected representatives to work on to address the issues of gig work? Or the other question would be, are there consumer practices that the audience members should consider if they're consumers of the services provided by independent workers? Go ahead.
You know, from our perspective, we've been talking about it on the panel today. Certainly, policy around portable benefits is key to not only our business, but others, and to the longevity of workers in the gig economy. We recently put our support behind a policy that's being reviewed right now by the Texas Workforce Commission that would provide clarity for workers and for companies like Hire around portable benefits, and excited to see where that leads. It's a lightning round, so I'll move quickly.
Thank you.
Excellent. I think I would encourage folks to urge their policymakers to take a look at the gig economy, not just for what it is today, but for where it may be pointing us. And there I would point to two things in particular. The first is the degree to which the gig economy is sort of spreading into and influencing hiring and workforce practices in more traditional sectors of the economy. And the second is just taking a look at, some of the platforms that we've been talking about here today are also actively investing in technological development that may dramatically reduce or obviate the need for human labor over time. And here I'm thinking about autonomous vehicles, I'm thinking about sidewalk delivery robots, I'm thinking about commercial delivery drones, and other technologies which may really change the game. So as much as we see these platforms having sort of dropped a drop into the pond that has had ripple effects, we may yet see another set of changes of similar magnitude as some of these technological developments become more sophisticated and to the extent that regulatory environments adapt to permit them passage.
Thank you. I'm going to go with the consumer question.
Please.
So I think as a consumer, be aware of the worker you're engaging with and what's behind either the platform or how they get their work, and understand how they're treated, what are the opportunities for them. And having that knowledge, I think, is important as you make your choices as a consumer day to day.
I'll take the consumer angle too. This was not pre-planned. I've been thinking a lot about what does it mean to be an ethical consumer of these sort of companies, particularly because I use Amazon Prime like it's nobody's business. And to be fair, I don't have a good answer right now. I'm still pondering. But it's this idea that, he was bringing up around sort of kindness and to your worker, whether it's saying hello or goodbye, tipping.
Libby, are labor unions part of the solution here?
I think there, as much variety as we see across the types of platforms, we also see a variety of different sort of feelings about portable benefits from the world of sort of traditional organized labor. I will say that the model that's being advanced as a legislative proposal in Washington State has strong support from SEIU locally, and that conception of portable benefits does place sort of the worker representative organization potentially at the center of an administration approach for benefits. So it provides an opportunity for a worker representative organization to earn revenue from the provision of benefits to a member base. So there are some who think about the future of labor and look at portable benefits as an interesting model to consider. And there are others who have a different set of feelings.
Sure.
I think it's fair to say.
Short of former labor unions, are there like associations? Are there worker groups? And are they a spot where some of this information and education could happen?
Yeah, so one I'm familiar with, which just launched back in November, is IPSE, IPSE, which is Independent Professionals Self-Employed. It's an association that is really focused on advocacy for independent workers, as well as the procurement of some of the benefits we've been talking about today. So that when someone joins as a member, they're automatically getting access to life insurance, for example, and some other benefits. So again, trying to replicate as close to it as you can that traditional employer-employee relationship. And there are others that are out there, and I think it's a space where there's a lot of interest, where somebody can step into sort of a quasi role of an employer, but be aware of all the things that come into play with that.
Sure. Lindsay, is there space for 50-plus workers in the gig economy?
Yeah, so I'll address both the 50-plus question, but also what you were getting at are these informal organizations. And you see a lot in the online space, very informally supporting drivers. There's a really popular blog that's run by Harry, the ride-sharing guy. And he posts almost every day, but there's like, are you earning the money that you're supposed to be earning, ways to sort of increase tip amounts, how to, giving advice about how to put car seats in your car, like very practical information that folks need. And then also on the Facebook groups, there's back and forth where sometimes drivers can notice there being problems in the apps, like people are not being paid enough when there's like a new incentive policy that's putting on, and folks sort of talk about that before in these informal groups. And then New York City has a drivers guild that's done a really great job. I sort of talked about sort of how they're having the porta potties at JFK, and they've helped lobby for the higher wage. So you're seeing these sort of informal organizing mechanisms coming up.
Libby, can you address that last point about is it the rare exception where folks can get these types of benefits and make this a career, or is that becoming more of an opportunity?
I think in general, we have seen over time a sort of significant shift of risk and cost from organizations to individuals. We have seen companies sort of pushing certain types of workers outside of their corporate boundary, engaging people as a service instead of as a direct cost. And the gig economy sort of is an extension of this, or has the potential to be an extension of this trend. And when we think about portable benefits, what we are looking to solve is the benefits gap that has sort of begun to exist in the face of this change to the nature of work and the nature of corporate organization. And I think when we look at independent contractors specifically, which are many of, but not all of, even the online platform workers, again, getting to all the sort of nuance that is unfortunately sort of part of this conversation, we do see that the rate of sort of benefits coverage for people, it's not just access, again, it's coverage. People who actually have coverage by benefits. It's sort of, there's sort of a steady downward trend to the right when you shift across a spectrum from a traditional full-time role to a part-time role to a contractor role to an independent contractor role. So that doesn't comment specifically on the gig economy platforms, but we see that across the whole workforce and having happened kind of slowly over time.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and that piggybacks to the question that was asked earlier via Twitter about whether or not job quality could be declining. And I mean, the macro answer is yes. Like, you can go from the very early days of the turn of the century where you have these more humane forms of more humane forms of work. You know, Henry Ford wanted to pay workers $5 a day, and sort of as more and more risk is being shifted from the organization to the individual, job quality is eroding, particularly for lower skilled and more medium skilled jobs. So there can, of course, be outliers for specific companies, like what you're seeing at Hire or the Hire app. But I think on a broader level, this is sort of a big concern that folks care about.